5:15 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The guided missile destroyer USS Gonzales was already navigating the narrow inbound shipping lane. This was supposed to be a routine transit into the Persian Gulf. It would soon become a flashpoint over a single garbled radio call. What happens when two heavily armed forces cannot understand each other in the dark? The sun had not yet broken over the jagged mountains of the Iranian coast. The water was a flat expanse of black glass, the air was heavy with humidity and the smell of diesel exhaust. On the bridge of the Gonzales, Commander Thomas Vance watched the digital chart display. The strait was only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Deep water channels were even tighter. Commercial tankers moved like slow behemoths in both directions. Navigating this choke point was a delicate exercise on a good day. Today was not a good day. The Combat Information Center reported over the internal comms. Bridge, we have 3 new surface contacts. Fast movers, emerging from Bandar Abbas. Vance looked out the starboard window. The darkness hid everything. Distance. The voice from the Combat Information Center responded. 12 nautical miles. Speed is 35 knots. Closing. This was standard posturing. Iranian fast attack craft often shadowed American warships. It was a deadly game of maritime chicken. The protocol was strict. Maintain course. Issue warnings. Do not escalate. Vance gave the order. Radio. Issue the standard safety warning on channel 16. The radio operator complied. Unknown vessels approaching USS Gonzales. This is a United States Navy warship. You are standing into danger. Maintain a distance of 2,000 yards. Over. Static filled the bridge speaker. It was a heavy crackle of atmospheric interference and encrypted crosstalk. 12 miles away, Commander Arash gripped the console of his fast attack craft. His 3-boat wolf pack cut through the water at 40 knots. They were conducting a standard perimeter patrol. Their orders were to observe and report. The American radio transmission burst through their speaker, but the signal was badly degraded. The noise reduction software in the Iranian radio clipped the audio. The translator listened to the broken English. He heard only fragments. United States Navy warship. Danger. Target. 2,000 yards. The word target was a misinterpretation of the static. It was a ghost in the machine. It did not matter. The perception of intent was sealed. Arash looked at his radar screen. The American destroyer was massive. It was a floating fortress, and according to his translator, it had just declared his small patrol a target. Arash spoke to his helmsman. They are threatening to engage. Tighten formation. Increase speed to 45 knots. We will not be intimidated in our own waters. The 3 fast boats surged forward. Their bows lifted out of the dark water. Heavy machine guns and rocket pods were mounted on their decks. They were small, but they were heavily armed. Back on the Gonzales, the radar operator noted the change. Bridge. Contacts are accelerating. They are now in a wedge formation. Speed is 45 knots. Bearing is constant. Decreasing range. Vance frowned. This was a deviation from the usual harassment playbook. Usually, they maintained speed. Surging forward after a warning was a hostile indicator. Vance spoke calmly. Sound the collision alarm. Bring weapon systems to standby. Do not lock on. The klaxon wailed through the ship, 3 short blasts. Hundreds of sailors woke from their racks and rushed to their battle stations. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 5:23 in the morning. The collision alarm ceased. The sudden silence on the bridge of the USS Gonzales was heavy. Commander Thomas Vance stepped onto the starboard bridge wing. The warm wind whipped at his uniform. He raised his night vision goggles. The horizon was a wall of black. The naked eye saw nothing. The radar told a different story. The tactical action officer spoke from the console inside. Range is now 9 nautical miles. They are holding 45 knots. Vance lowered the goggles and stepped back onto the bridge. Radio. Try them again. Clear and slow. Make sure they understand we are navigating a restricted channel. The radio operator keyed the microphone. Iranian vessels. This is the United States Navy warship Gonzales. You are approaching at high speed. Alter your course to starboard. Over. The response was immediate. It was not a voice. It was a chaotic burst of electronic noise and static. The atmospheric interference over the warm Gulf waters was wreaking havoc on the unencrypted channel. 5:25 in the morning. Commander Arash stood braced against the center console of his fast attack craft. The small boat pounded violently against the dark waves. Salt water sprayed across the reinforced windshield. The American destroyer was no longer just a radar blip. It was a massive shadow blocking the lower stars. His radio operator turned around. "Commander, another transmission from the Americans. It is heavily distorted." "I cannot translate." Arash gripped the steel handrail. The Americans had already called them a target in the first broken message. Now they were broadcasting unreadable demands while deep inside the strait. To yield course in these waters without clear communication was to show weakness. To press forward was a calculated risk. Arash spoke loudly over the roar of the twin diesel engines. "Maintain course. Hold the wedge formation. If they attempt to alter heading to block us, we will split and flank them. Send crews forward. Stand by the gun mounts. Do not remove the covers," the crew acknowledged. The three boats held their aggressive line. 5:27 in the morning. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Gonzales, the atmosphere was clinical. Screens glowed with green tactical data. The room was bathed in blue light. The weapons officer looked at his display. "Sir, the contacts are not altering course. Range is 7 miles. Time to intercept is under 10 minutes at current speeds." Vance listened through his earpiece on the bridge. He knew the escalation matrix. He had to increase the intensity of the warning without crossing the line into a hostile act. Vance spoke with measured authority. "Bridge. Activate the long-range acoustic device. Give them the warning tone. And prepare the starboard searchlight. Let us make sure they know we see them." 5:28 in the morning. A piercing electronic siren blasted from the destroyer. The acoustic device was designed to cause severe physical discomfort at close range. At 7 miles, it was a clear auditory demand to halt. A second later, a massive beam of intense white light erupted from the upper deck of the Gonzales. The searchlight cut a brilliant, solid path through the pre-dawn darkness. It swept quickly across the water and locked directly onto the lead Iranian boat. On the fast craft, the blinding light flooded the open cockpit. Arash raised his arm to shield his eyes. Everything outside the boat vanished into a wall of white glare. In the chaos of the flashing light and the blaring siren, the tactical picture fractured. The Iranian helmsman shouted, "They are illuminating us. I cannot see the horizon." Arash made a split-second decision based on blinding light and garbled words. A high-intensity searchlight often preceded a targeting laser. The Americans were locking on. Arash issued the command, "Break formation, evasive maneuvers. Uncover the bow guns." The three fast boats scattered into the dark. The covers came off the heavy machine guns. The rules of engagement had just shifted. 5:31 in the morning. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Gonzales, the tactical picture fractured. The single cluster of 3 hostile contacts split into 3 distinct vectors. They were fanning out. This was a classic swarm tactic. It was designed to overwhelm a single ship defense system by attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. The tactical action officer spoke rapidly. "Bridge. Contacts have broken formation. They are spreading wide. The lead boat is holding center. The other 2 are flanking port and starboard. Speed is holding at 45 knots. Range is 6 miles. Commander Vance watched the digital display on the bridge. The searchlight beam was now useless against dispersed targets. He ordered it turned off. The sudden return of absolute darkness made the sea feel smaller. He needed to keep all 3 boats on one side of his ship. Vance gave the order. "Helm, come right 15 degrees. Keep them all on our starboard side." "We cannot let them surround us in this channel," the helmsman replied. "Coming right 15 degrees. Aye." The massive 10,000-ton warship banked slightly in the dark water. Its wake churned white against the Black Sea. The maneuver was purely defensive. It was meant to simplify the radar picture and keep the threat directional. 5:32 in the morning. Commander Arash blinked hard. His eyes were watering from the intense glare of the American searchlight. As his boat veered sharply away, the blinding beam swept past them and vanished. His natural night vision was completely ruined. He relied entirely on his illuminated instruments. His radar operator called out over the engine noise. "Commander, the American warship is altering course. They are turning to starboard. They are trying to cut off our northern flank." Arash wiped salt spray from his face and looked at the glowing green screen. The destroyer was indeed turning into their path. To the Iranian commander, this was not a defensive posture. It was an intercept vector. In his mind, the Americans had threatened them on the radio, blinded them with a high-intensity light, and were now physically blocking their patrol route. Arash keyed his tactical radio to his wingmen. "Wolfpack 2 and 3, the target is attempting to corral us. Increase speed to 50 knots. Push past their bow. We will not yield our lane." The 3 fast boats throttled up. The deep hum of the marine diesel engines became a high-pitched scream. Their speed crossed 50 knots. The small hulls pounded violently against the waves. 5:34 in the morning. The distance collapsed to 4 nautical miles. The tension on the Gonzales Bridge was a physical weight. The air conditioning was freezing, but the crew was sweating. The surface warfare officer stared at the infrared optical feed. The thermal imaging cut through the darkness. It revealed stark white shapes against the cool water. The heat signatures of the Iranian engines were massive, but the officer was looking at the front decks. He spoke with strict professionalism. "Bridge. Optics confirm the forward gun mounts on the approaching contacts are uncovered. I repeat, weapons are unmasked. They have crews on the forward decks." Vance tightened his grip on the console railing. The situation was spiraling faster than protocol could catch it. The rules of engagement required proportionality. He could not fire first. But he could not be caught unprepared. A single rocket-propelled grenade from one of those boats could cripple his radar systems. Vance issued the command. "Bridge, man, the 50 caliber machine gun mounts. Port and starboard. Keep the weapons elevated. Do not load. I say again, do not chamber around." Sailors in heavy ballistic armor rushed out onto the open weather decks. They took their positions behind the heavy machine guns. The wind howled past them. The cold steel of the weapons felt heavy in their hands. They aimed the barrels high into the dark sky. It was a visible sign of readiness without immediate threat. The distance was 3 miles. The time to intercept was under 4 minutes. The strait was shrinking. 5:36 in the morning. United States 5th Fleet Headquarters, Manama, Bahrain. The watch floor was completely silent. A massive digital map dominated the front wall of the command center. Blue and red icons converged in the center of the Strait of Hormuz. The distance between them was no longer measured in miles. It was measured in yards. Admiral James Block stood with his arms crossed. He watched the red triangles representing the Iranian fast boats accelerate. They were flanking the USS Gonzales in a coordinated tactical maneuver. The fleet tactical officer spoke from his console. "Admiral, the Gonzales reports Iranian gun mounts are manned and uncovered. Range is 2.5 miles. Speed is 50 knots. The Admiral did not blink. He kept his eyes on the main screen. "What are Commander Vance's current actions?" The officer responded immediately. "He has manned the 50 caliber mounts. Weapons are elevated. He is holding fire in accordance with rules of engagement." The Admiral nodded slowly. "The rules of engagement were strict for a reason. You could not fire until fired upon, or until hostile intent was undeniable and imminent. A fast boat aiming a weapon was hostile intent. A fast boat simply driving fast was a gray area. The opposing forces lived in that gray area." The Admiral spoke quietly. "Tell Vance to hold the line. Do not give them a reason, but do not let them take a free shot." 5:37 in the morning. Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Naval Headquarters, Bandar Abbas, Iran. The operations room smelled of strong tea and stale cigarette smoke. Captain Reza watched the same digital convergence on his own tactical screen. His men were pushing the American destroyer. The communications officer pressed a heavy headset to his ear. "Captain, Commander Arash reports the American ship is trying to box them in. He has accelerated to 50 knots to clear the bow and maintain the patrol lane. Captain Reza leaned over the plotting table. Arash was a highly aggressive commander. Sometimes he was too aggressive. But yielding the right-of-way to an American warship in their own coastal backyard was completely unacceptable. It projected weakness. Reza issued a direct command. Tell Arash to proceed, cross the bow. Show them we dictate the transit lanes. But remind him of the standing orders. Do not lock weapons. Do not fire the first shot. The game was a dangerous balance of power. Push the opposing force to the edge. Make them flinch. But do not start a massive conflict before sunrise. 5:39 in the morning, the Strait of Hormuz. The gap closed entirely. The lead Iranian fast boat angled directly across the path of the USS Gonzales. The distance was exactly 500 meters. In the open ocean, 500 meters was a rounding error. At a closing speed of 50 knots in the dark, it was point-blank range. Commander Vance stood perfectly still on the open bridge wing. The roar of the Iranian twin diesel engines cut right through the sound of the ocean wind. The small boat tore across the black water. A massive plume of white spray trailed behind it. Vance could see the Iranian sailors on the forward deck through his thermal optics. They were gripping the handles of their heavy machine guns. The weapons were pointed up at the sky. But their faces were locked on the towering steel wall of the American destroyer. The bridge talker relayed the tracker's frantic report. Target 1 is crossing our bow. Distance is 400 meters, 300 meters. The Gonzales was 10,000 tons of moving steel. It could not stop quickly. It could barely turn in time. If the fast boat lost an engine right now, the destroyer would cut the small craft in half. Vance held his breath. He watched the Iranian boat surge past the massive steel bow of his ship. The heavy wake from the destroyer caught the small craft. The fast boat pitched violently in the churning water. For 2 seconds, the Iranian forward gunner lost his footing on the wet deck. His hands slipped on the weapon mount. The heavy barrel dropped directly toward the American ship. On the Gonzales weather deck, the American gunner saw the barrel drop. He tightened his grip on the spades of his .50 caliber machine gun. His thumb hovered over the butterfly trigger. The American gunner breathed in. He waited for the flash of an enemy muzzle. The Iranian gunner desperately regained his balance. He hauled the heavy metal barrel back up to the dark sky. Both men on opposite sides of the water exhaled. A single twitch of a finger would have changed the world. 5:41 in the morning. The lead Iranian boat cleared the massive steel bow of the USS Gonzales. It vanished into the darkness on the port side. The immediate threat of collision passed. The tactical nightmare had just begun. Commander Thomas Vance watched his radar screen. The single swarm was now a coordinated pincer movement. 2 remaining fast boats held their positions on the port and starboard quarters of the destroyer. They were matching speed at 45 knots. They were perfectly synchronized. The tactical action officer spoke rapidly. Bridge, target 2 is at our 7 o'clock. Target 3 is at our 5 o'clock. Distance is 800 yards and holding. They are boxing us in. The heavy warship was trapped in a moving cage. The Iranian boats were positioned in the blind spots of the main guns. The .50 caliber machine gun crews on the weather decks tracked the shadows. They could hear the enemy engines whining over the waves. 5:42 in the morning, Commander Arash fought the steering column of his fast attack craft. The wake from the American warship had nearly thrown his gunner into the sea. His heart pounded against his ribs. The urge to fire was overwhelming. He pushed it down. Discipline was the only thing keeping them alive. He keyed his tactical radio. Wolfpack 2 and 3, hold your flanking positions. Pin them into the center of the channel. Do not let them turn. Force them to maintain a straight line until we clear the strait. The flanking boats responded with 2 clicks of their radios. The trap was set. The American destroyer was a captive giant. It was surrounded by small and lethal wasps. Arash brought his own boat around in a wide arc. He positioned himself directly behind the American ship. The Wolfpack was now in a triangle formation. 5:43 in the morning, United States 5th Fleet Headquarters, Manama. The digital map on the main screen showed the deadly geometry of the situation. Admiral James Block watched the three red triangles surrounding the single blue icon. The room was deathly quiet. The fleet tactical officer pointed at the screen. "Admiral, the Gonzales is approaching the shallow water shelf. The Iranian vessels have established a physical blockade on the port turn vector." The admiral leaned forward. His voice was low and hard. "They are using the maritime exclusion zone against us. If Vance turns, it is a physical collision. If he goes straight, he grounds the ship." The operations staff stared at the telemetry. The rules of engagement offered no solution for geography. A ship could not defend itself against an island. 5:44 in the morning. The physical reality of the Strait of Hormuz began to dictate the battle. The deep water channel was not a straight line. It curved to follow the jagged coastline of the Musandam Peninsula. The navigator on the Gonzales called out the warning. "Bridge, we are approaching waypoint Delta. The channel narrows in 2 miles. We must alter course to port by 10 degrees to stay in deep water." Vance looked at the tactical display. The Iranian boat on his port quarter was exactly where he needed to turn. If he ordered the helm to port, he would ram the fast boat. The Iranians would call it an unprovoked ramming maneuver. It would be an act of war. If he held his course, the 10,000-ton destroyer would run aground on a submerged coral reef. The Iranian commander had positioned his boats perfectly. He was using the geography of the ocean floor as a weapon. Vance gripped the railing. The sweat on his forehead was cold. He had 60 seconds to make a choice. He could crush the Iranian boat, or he could beach a billion-dollar warship in hostile waters. He turned to the helm. His voice was completely steady. "Helm, stand by for a hard turn to port. Sound the general quarters alarm. This is no longer a warning." The klaxon echoed through the steel corridors. The clock was running out. 5:45 in the morning. The helm of the USS Gonzales went hard over to port. The response was not immediate. A warship of that immense size takes time to bite into the water. When it did, the entire hull shuddered deep within its steel frame. The deck tilted violently to the side. Unsecured gear crashed to the floor inside the Combat Information Center. Commander Thomas Vance held tightly onto the bridge console. His eyes were locked on the digital tactical display. The turn rate was agonizingly slow. But the sheer mass behind the maneuver was completely unstoppable. The ship was carving a new path to avoid the underwater coral reef. That physical path intersected directly with the Iranian fast boat hovering on their port quarter. 50 yards away across the black water, the Iranian crew watched the nightmare unfold. The American destroyer was no longer just a dark shape blocking the stars. It was a towering cliff of solid gray steel, and it was falling directly toward them. Commander Arash stared upward in absolute disbelief. He had played this dangerous game of maritime chicken a dozen times before. The Americans always backed down. They always chose extreme caution over confrontation. But Arash had miscalculated the geography of the seabed. He had forced the American commander to choose between destroying his own ship on a reef or running over the blockade. The American chose the boat. 5:45 and 30 seconds in the morning. The internal radio crackled loudly on the Gonzales bridge. It was the tactical action officer. His voice was strained. "Bridge, Target 2 is not moving out of the vector. They are caught in our pressure wave." Vance grabbed the heavy radio handset. "Sound the collision alarm. All hands brace for immediate shock." The emergency klaxon ripped through the steel corridors of the warship. Sailors deep below the waterline dropped to the deck and grabbed onto fixed pipes. The 50 caliber machine gunners out on the open weather decks strapped themselves tightly to their mounts. They looked straight down at the Iranian boat. They could clearly see the enemy sailors scrambling in absolute panic. On the fast attack craft, the mechanical noise was deafening. The twin diesel engines screamed at maximum revolutions. The helmsman hauled the steering wheel hard to port. Nothing happened. The massive displacement of ocean water from the turning destroyer created a powerful hydrodynamic vacuum. The small boat was physically trapped in the trough. It was being sucked sideways directly into the steel hull of the American warship. Arash grabbed his tactical radio. He shouted over the roaring engines and the crashing waves. "Wolfpack 2 and 3. Break off. Break off immediately." 5:46 in the morning. The physical distance dropped to 30 yards. Then 20. The heavy saltwater spray from the destroyer crashed entirely over the open cockpit of the Iranian boat. United States 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain was entirely silent. The red and blue digital icons on the main command screen touched. They overlapped into a single glowing mass. The tactical system began flashing a bright red collision warning. Admiral James Block gripped the heavy wooden edge of his desk. The gray area of diplomacy was officially gone. This was the physical spark that would ignite the entire region. Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Naval Headquarters in Bandar Abbas watched the exact same overlapping icons on their own screens. Captain Reza stood totally frozen by the plotting table. His aggressive swarm tactics had completely failed. He was about to lose a fast boat and its entire crew. And his nation was about to be plunged into an open naval conflict before the sun even came up. Out on the dark water, the final seconds evaporated. The massive bow wave of the Gonzales rose over the small craft like a concrete wall. The Iranian forward gunner completely abandoned his weapon post. He curled into a tight ball on the wet deck. Arash closed his eyes. Vance braced his legs for the violent metallic scream of tearing hulls. The devastating collision was absolute. It was completely unavoidable. The entire world held its breath. Then, 5:46 and 10 seconds in the morning, the sound hit them before the sight. It was a low and physical vibration that shook the thick morning air. It was not the high pitch of the fast attack craft. It was not the heavy hum of the destroyer. It was a massive and deafening blast. The emergency horn of a commercial Leviathan. Commander Thomas Vance looked past the Iranian fast boat. Commander Arash looked past the American destroyer. Both men saw the exact same nightmare emerging from the darkness. A wall of black steel blotted out the horizon. It was a fully loaded, ultra-large crude carrier, 330 meters of solid mass. And it was completely in the wrong place. 5:46 and 20 seconds in the morning. The commercial supertanker was experiencing a catastrophic steering failure. A hydraulic line in its massive rudder system had ruptured 3 minutes earlier. The civilian crew lost all control of their heading. The heavy ocean current and the ship momentum took over. The tanker began to swerve wildly out of the outbound shipping lane. It drifted directly into the inbound deep water channel. It was moving at 14 knots. It carried 2 million barrels of crude oil. It was an unstoppable force sliding sideways across the narrow strait, and it was bearing down directly on the USS Gonzales and the trapped Iranian fast boat. The tactical picture vanished. The rules of engagement evaporated. The military standoff was over. The ocean had just dealt a lethal hand to both sides, 5:46 and 30 seconds in the morning. Commander Vance did not hesitate. The Iranian fast boat was no longer the primary threat. The mountain of steel sliding toward his port bow was the only thing that mattered. Vance shouted over the alarms. Helm! Abort the port turn! Rudder amidships! All engines back, emergency full. The helmsman spun the heavy wheel. All engines back, emergency full. Aye. Deep inside the engineering spaces of the Gonzales, massive gas turbine engines roared in absolute protest. They shifted violently from forward thrust to maximum reverse. The entire 10,000-ton warship shook violently. The deck plates vibrated. The ship groaned loudly as it fought its own massive forward momentum. Out on the dark water, the sudden reversal of the American propellers changed everything. The powerful hydrodynamic vacuum that trapped the Iranian fast boat suddenly collapsed. 5:46 and 40 seconds in the morning. Commander Arash felt the crushing pressure release. The water around his small boat churned into angry white foam. The invisible suction holding them against the destroyer finally broke. Arash screamed at his helmsman. Hard starboard. Full throttle. Get us clear of the big ships. The Iranian helmsman wrenched the steering column. The twin diesel engines screamed. The small boat broke free from the churning trough. It shot out away from the American warship. It bounced violently over the massive wake. The crew held on for their lives. The fast boat cleared the danger zone by a fraction of a second. 5:47 in the morning. The bridge of the USS Gonzales was completely silent except for the collision alarm. The ship was still sliding forward. The reverse thrust was fighting millions of pounds of inertia. The massive black hull of the supertanker filled the entire portside window of the bridge. It blocked out the sky. The sound of its blaring horn was deafening. The sharp smell of crude oil and burning engine friction filled the heavy air. Vance stood perfectly still at the window. He watched the rusted steel plates of the tanker pass just yards away from his own forward deck. The two massive vessels scraped the same stretch of dark water. The massive displacement waves crashed completely over the bow of the destroyer. The ocean violently protested the sudden compression between the two giants. Hundreds of miles away, the digital icons on the command screens merged into a chaotic cluster. Both the American and Iranian crews watched the Leviathan block the entire strait. The deadly game of maritime chess was abruptly abandoned. The focus shifted entirely from combat to absolute survival. 5:49 in the morning. The USS Gonzales shuddered violently. Millions of pounds of water pushed back against the massive steel hull. The emergency reverse thrust was tearing at the physical limits of the ship. Commander Thomas Vance did not look away from the window. The black wall of the commercial supertanker slid past the bridge. It was so close that Vance could read the faded white letters of its registry on the hull. Sparks showered down into the ocean as the tanker dragged its broken rudder assembly. The noise was absolute. The smell of raw crude oil and burning friction was overpowering. Vance spoke loudly over the blaring alarms. "Status report. Did we hit them?" The surface warfare officer checked the telemetry. Negative impact. We cleared the tanker by 40 yards. We are drifting backward at 4 knots. Vance exhaled slowly. 40 yards was nothing. He gripped the console rail. "Secure the collision alarm. Bring the engines to neutral. Check our depth." The navigator called out immediately. "Depth is 60 feet. We are drifting toward the coral reef. We need forward momentum now." 5:50 in the morning. The water on the eastern side of the strait was a chaotic mess. The massive displacement waves from the turning destroyer and the sliding supertanker collided. They created a violent washing machine effect in the dark water. Commander Arash clung to the steering column of his fast attack craft. The small boat launched off the crest of a 10-foot wave and slammed down into the trough. The impact rattled his teeth. Solid green water poured over the reinforced windshield. His helmsman was shouting in panic, "I cannot hold the heading! The current is too strong!" Arash fought the wheel alongside his man. "Keep the bow into the waves. Do not let us roll over." He grabbed his tactical radio. "Wolfpack 2 and 3, report your status." Static hissed back at him. The physical wall of the supertanker was blocking their line of sight. It was also scrambling their short-range communications. Arash wiped the heavy salt water from his eyes. His aggressive blockade was completely broken. His primary concern was no longer the American warship. It was keeping his own crew from drowning in the artificial storm. 5:51 in the morning. United States 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain was blind. The tactical feed from the strait was a tangled knot of overlapping digital signatures. The massive radar cross-section of the supertanker consumed the entire screen. Admiral James Block stared at the display. The red and blue icons were gone. They were swallowed by a single massive yellow block, indicating a civilian vessel in distress. The fleet tactical officer was typing rapidly. "Admiral, we have lost direct telemetry with the Gonzales. The supertanker is causing massive electronic interference." The admiral kept his voice flat. "Get them on satellite communication. I need a physical status of that ship." Now, hundreds of miles away in Bandar Abbas, Captain Reza was facing the exact same blackout. His fast boats did not carry heavy satellite dishes. They relied on line-of-sight radio. The supertanker had completely severed that line. Reza slammed his hand onto the plotting table. "Send a maritime patrol helicopter. I need eyes on the water." 5:52 in the morning. The supertanker drifted entirely through the deep water channel. Its sheer size created a physical barrier of solid steel between the American destroyer and the Iranian fast boats. The immediate threat of combat was replaced by the overwhelming reality of maritime survival. On the bridge of the Gonzales, the radio operator keyed his console. He was not trying to reach the fast boats. He was tuning to the International Maritime Distress Frequency. The operator spoke clearly. "Bridge. I have an open broadcast from the civilian tanker. They are declaring a steering casualty. They are requesting immediate assistance from any vessel in the area." Vance looked out the window. The sky was finally beginning to turn a pale gray. The dark shadow of the tanker was moving slowly toward the shallow waters of the Omani coast. The radar showed the Iranian fast boats regrouping on the far side of the massive civilian ship. The combat scenario had evaporated. The ocean had intervened. 5:55 in the morning. The supertanker cleared the deep water channel. It left a massive wake of churned mud and white foam. The physical barrier between the two military forces was gone, but the dynamic had completely changed. The USS Gonzales held its position. The gas turbine engines idled. Commander Thomas Vance listened to the open distress frequency on the bridge. The civilian tanker captain was panicking. His voice broke over the radio. His massive ship was drifting toward the shallow Omani coastline. He needed heavy tugboats immediately. Vance looked at the tactical radar screen. The 3 Iranian fast boats were visible again. They had survived the crossing. They were regrouping 2 miles away on the eastern edge of the strait. Vance spoke to the radio operator. "Open a channel to the Iranian fast boats. Unencrypted channel 16. Bridge to bridge." The operator hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Aye. Channel 16 is open." Vance picked up the heavy black handset. He spoke slowly and clearly. "Iranian naval vessels. This is the United States Navy warship Gonzales. Be advised, the civilian supertanker has lost steering control. We are standing by to coordinate emergency maritime traffic. Do you copy? Over." 5:56 in the morning. Commander Arash stood in the soaked cockpit of his fast attack craft. His crew was desperately bailing water. The heavy machine guns were dripping with sea salt. The covers were still off. The American radio transmission came through his main speaker. This time, there was no static. There was no garbled translation software clipping the words. The English was perfectly clear and entirely calm. Arash looked at the massive black shape of the crippled supertanker. It was a severe hazard to everyone in the strait. The American commander was not threatening him. He was sharing critical navigational intelligence. He was acting as a professional mariner in a crisis. Arash keyed his microphone. He spoke in heavily accented but precise English. "Warship Gonzales. This is the Iranian patrol commander. We copy your transmission. We see the hazard. We will alter course to clear the channel for emergency vessels. Over." 5:57 in the morning. United States 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain. Admiral James Block exhaled slowly. The intense silence in the command center finally broke. The overlapping digital icons on the main screen separated. The red triangles representing the Iranian boats turned away from the blue circle of the destroyer. The fleet tactical officer reported the change. "Admiral, the Gonzales and the Iranian vessels are communicating on open channels. The fast boats are breaking away. They are heading back toward Bandar Abbas. Speed is 20 knots. The admiral nodded. "Keep the Gonzales on station. Monitor the tanker until the tugs arrive. Stand down the alert status to condition 3. Hundreds of miles away in Bandar Abbas, Captain Reza gave a similar order to his operations room. "Tell Arash to return to base. The patrol is complete. Log the incident as a navigational hazard avoidance maneuver." Both sides stepped back from the absolute edge. They used the civilian emergency as a mutual exit strategy. It allowed both commanders to disengage without projecting weakness. They were no longer combatants. They were sailors, yielding to a distressed vessel. 5:58 in the morning. The first light of dawn broke over the jagged Zagros Mountains. The black water of the strait turned a deep and metallic blue. The USS Gonzales sat quietly in the current. Commander Vance stepped out onto the port bridge wing. The cold morning air was finally replacing the heavy smell of diesel exhaust and crude oil. He raised his heavy binoculars. He watched the 3 small white wakes of the Iranian fast boats disappear into the eastern horizon. The heavy machine guns on their decks were no longer visible. They were no longer a swarm. They were just boats going home. The surface warfare officer stepped out behind him. "Sir, the Omani Coast Guard is responding to the tanker. The channel is clear for transit." Vance lowered the binoculars. He looked down at the dark water sliding past the steel hull. "Resume our base course. Speed 15 knots. Let us get into the Gulf." 12 hours later, United States 5th Fleet Headquarters in Manama, Admiral James Block sat alone in the briefing room. The large digital map was turned off. In front of him lay a thick paper folder. It was the preliminary after-action report from the USS Gonzales. He read the transcript of the initial radio contact. He read the analysis from the Signals Intelligence Division. The cause of the massive escalation was a single misunderstood word. A burst of atmospheric static, a degraded radio signal, a translation error. The Americans broadcasted a standard safety warning. The Iranians heard a targeting threat. From that single electronic spark, two heavily armed militaries nearly destroyed each other. The admiral closed the paper folder. The margin of error in the Strait of Hormuz was 0. There was no room for static. There was no room for misinterpretation. The rules of engagement were designed for absolute clarity, but the physical environment was built for absolute chaos. 24 hours later, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Naval Headquarters in Bandar Abbas, Captain Reza stood by the window overlooking the military harbor. Commander Arash stood at rigid attention behind him. The tactical debriefing had lasted 4 exhausting hours. Reza turned away from the window. His voice was quiet. He did not yell. The reality of the near miss was too severe for anger. He spoke deliberately. You executed the blockade perfectly. You used the geography of the shallow water shelf to trap the American warship. Tactically, it was a flawless swarm maneuver. Arash nodded slightly, but he did not smile. Reza continued. But strategically, it was a total disaster. You forced a commander with a 10,000-ton ship to choose between running aground and ramming your boat. You left him no honorable exit. When you leave a massive enemy no exit, they will drive straight through you. The lesson was brutally clear. Pushing an adversary to the absolute edge only works if the edge does not crumble beneath both of you. 3 days later, the Pentagon, Washington District of Columbia. Military analysts reviewed the classified telemetry from the encounter. They mapped the exact positions of the guided missile destroyer, the 3 fast attack craft, and the commercial supertanker. They calculated the closing speeds and the final reaction times. The official conclusion was chilling. Neither the American nor the Iranian commanders had made a fatal tactical error. Both men had followed their strict training. Both men had fiercely defended their national interests. Both men had prepared their crews to fight and die. Standard diplomacy had failed. Open radio communication had failed. Defensive tactical maneuvering had failed. The only thing that prevented a massive naval war in the Persian Gulf was a ruptured hydraulic line on a civilian oil tanker. A completely random mechanical failure had forced a physical steel wedge between 2 colliding militaries. It gave them the one thing they both desperately needed, but could not ask for: an excuse to stop. A week later, the Strait of Hormuz. The black water was calm. The deep inbound channel was entirely clear. Another American warship entered the narrow choke point. Another Iranian fast boat patrol slipped its moorings to shadow the transit. The standard radio warnings were issued over the open channels. The radar speeds were carefully monitored. The deadly game of maritime chess resumed exactly as it had before. No missiles flew that morning, no ships were lost. But the invisible line between a routine transit and an international conflict had been completely exposed. When the line was crossed, both sides were fully ready to fire. But when given a legitimate reason to disengage, both sides chose restraint. Modern warfare in the narrow seas is a fragile and terrifying balance. It is decided not just by the heavy weapons mounted on the deck, it is decided by the intense discipline of the sailors holding them. And sometimes, it is decided by the unpredictable intervention of the ocean itself.